Last October, I announced that we would be opening up the Synod on Synodality not only to those invited to Rome or selected by their dioceses, but to our audience. We decided to accompany the Church on this synodal listening journey. Now, I asked you, the viewers, to choose 5 topics that you're most concerned about right now, that you'd like to hear more about. And you responded. We've received thousands of tweets and emails, and tonight we're going to share with you the top 5 issues that you think need attention in the Church today. They are better Catholic teaching and evangelization, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist and the sacraments, marriage and the family, the sanctity of life, priestly vocations and religious life, and finally, preserving traditions and the traditional Latin Mass. Joining me now with analysis of the first of our World Over Synod discussions and news of the day is editor of the Catholic Response, Father PETER STRAVINSKAS, and professor of theology at the Catholic University of America, Chad Pecknold. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. Father, I want to start with you. Catholic teaching and evangelization is the #1 most important issue to our viewers. First of all, are you surprised by this? And do you expect that issue to rank at all at the Synod in Rome?
I'm not surprised that it surfaces as an issue, because if we don't know what the Church teaches, how are we evangelizing? And why has the evangelization process been so bad for the past 40, 50 years? It's precisely because no one seems to know, although there's no shortage of documents. From Paul VI, Credo of the People of God, to John Paul's Catechism and hundreds and hundreds of documents in between. But somehow or other, these always remain great secrets. And they fail to surface in religious education programs and unfortunately in some venues, so-called Catholic colleges, where they're actually contradicted. So it's a serious problem. And we've met the enemy, and it's us. We have not responded to the promptings of the Holy Spirit that have come to us through the authentic magisterium, and therefore unable to do the job that needs to be done by virtue of our baptism and confirmation.
This past Saturday, a plenary meeting of the German Catholic Church's Synodal Way ended with votes in favor of draft texts calling for same-sex blessings and changes to the Catechism on homosexuality. Now, the participants backed a document entitled Blessing Celebrations for Couples Who Love Each Other. Now, that was adopted by 161 votes to 34. They also endorsed further discussion of a text on, quote, the magisterial reassessment of homosexuality. 174 voted in favor of that, only 22 against. The specific text in the document says the following: the Catechism should be revised as part of a reevaluation of homosexuality. Chad, what do you make of these calls for changes in the Catholic Catechism from this German Synod?
It's so shameful, Raymond. We've been seeing this coming for years, actually. This is the sort of buildup that we were worried about from the very first Synod on the family, is that through sort of catechetical changes, through changes to the Church's law about marriage and divorce and remarriage, we were going to finally get to this place where the Germans got what they wanted, where actually social progressives got what they wanted, which was the blessing of homosexual acts. So that homosexual acts, the 90% of the German Synod thinks that homosexual acts aren't actually morally sinful, and that homosexual inclinations aren't actually disordered. That's open heresy. It strikes me that we have on display right now open schism, and St. Augustine used to say that heresy was a schism grown old. Well, now we have actually a schism grown so powerful that it can spread its heresy everywhere.
And the calls for the changes to the Catechism of the Catholic Church don't end there. Another text entitled Magisterial Statements on Conjugal Love was accepted 169 votes to 30. The document says, quote, spouses take responsibility for the timing of becoming parents, for the number of their children, as well as the various methods of family planning. This is done in mutual respect and personal conscience. Father Stravinskas, what's the goal here? I mean, the German church can't just change the catechism. Is this part of a huge pressure campaign, I guess in this case, to embrace artificial contraceptives?
The great irony here is that the positions being advocated by this German synod, as a matter of fact, are issues that would cause Martin Luther to vomit. All of the moral issues that they're raising are, first of all, completely contrary to Scripture and the entire lived tradition of the Church, and it's a clear example of a desire to move in a direction which is actually totally secular, nothing to do with the teachings of the gospel, and unfortunately, though, it's well supported by the German church tax. And so they have the money, and thanks to modern media, they have a ready audience.
Chad, just last week we reported on Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich of Luxembourg. He's been appointed the Relator General to this upcoming Synod on Synodality in Rome. Now, in a recent interview, he called for the revision of Catholic teaching on homosexuality himself. He said Catholic teaching is no longer correct. Your thoughts? There seems to be a movement here among leaders in the Catholic Church, if we're not misreading this or understanding this.
You think, Raymond, that the people who are paying for the Synod on Synodality are really going to let the German synodal way not set the tone for the Synod on Synodality? It's absolutely a test run for the Synod on Synodality. This is the big push to change church teachings. I mean, worldliness in the church isn't going to work differently than worldliness in the world. We're seeing it right before our eyes.
Is the audience right to be concerned about teaching and the understanding of church teaching? And again, I asked this question last October, which, we heard rumblings from the German Synod, but nothing like we've been hearing in recent days.
Well, I mean, look, both the lay faithful who watch your show and the Pope have asked for a stress upon evangelization. And what the German synodal way gives us is something like conformity to disorder, conformity to lies about holy orders, conformity to lies about holy matrimony, and fundamentally a lie about what makes us one in the Eucharist. So I think what we're seeing right now is the test run for a major attack on the church's teaching. We have full-blown de facto schism with heretical teachings on the table, with a sort of parasynod going on in Germany that's supposed to set the tone for what's going to go on in Rome in October. Yet people should be really worried.
Father Stravinskas, here we have the Relator General of this upcoming Synod, as well as the head of the European Bishops' Conferences, saying it's possible to change church teaching, on homosexuality, not same-sex attraction, by the way, which the church does not define as sinful, but the acts involved. Is a change in church teaching even possible here?
Well, of course not. But Hollerich himself, I mean, he's a Jesuit, and he ought to know better, I would hope. But in his interview, he indicated that he thought that the church's teaching on same-sex activity was grounded in a misunderstanding of what it meant in biblical times. And he went on to say it was connected to pagan rituals. That's nothing to do with same-sex activity. That was temple prostitution, and that was female activity, not same-sex activity. So even the basis of what he's asking for is off. I think he's trying to have a kind of fig leaf for himself by saying, well, we're not changing the teaching. We have a better understanding now of what it meant 5,000 years ago. But it's not accurate either.
Chad, do you believe that sexual morality will be a centerpiece at the Synod of the discussion?
I mean, it looks that way, Raymond. It looks like everything has been pointed this way, not just with what I think of as a parasynod going on in Germany, but all the way back to the Synod on the Family. This is a pattern, a repeated pattern of those who have been advancing the agendas during this pontificate.
A Pew study released in December found that 29% of Americans are not affiliated with any religion. Now, that's up from 16% when Pew first asked that question in 2007. Father, when we consider evangelization, which is part of our audience's concerns here, how difficult is it to evangelize when the Church's teachings seem unclear or constantly challenged from within by those who are supposed to support, espouse, and expand it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as I said at the outset, we've met the enemy and it's us. And so the problem is we have to get our act together. And again, people are trying to propose programs that have failed miserably in all of the mainstream Protestant denominations. Certainly, we've had hemorrhaging, but you look at the Episcopal Church, for instance, they're probably only about 30% of what they were 25 years ago. And you know, if we're supposedly, now I don't think a criterion ought to be, we'll get more people if we do this. We do it because it's true. However, the irony again is that these people are saying, no, this is what we've got to do. We haven't gotten liberal enough. And we see, whether it's the Methodists or the Episcopalians or various branches of Lutherans and so forth, have all gone over the cliff. And so why would you want to repeat the process? To me, that, again, that's independent of a doctrinal issue.
A recent report by the Wall Street Journal shows that the Catholic Church is losing members in Latin America, even in Brazil, which has the most Catholics of any country in the world. It's expected to become a minority Catholic country as soon as this year. Now, the reasons people are leaving vary, but critics cite the rise in liberation theology in the 60s and 70s, a time when the Catholic Church in Latin America increasingly stressed its mission as one of social justice, in some cases drawing on Marxist ideas. What is interesting is that many of the conversions in Brazil are to Pentecostal Christianity, people drawn to socially traditional views in these communities. Chad, where is the Catholic Church falling short in terms of relaying the essentials of the faith, and how does that impact evangelization and cause this kind of hemorrhaging?
Well, I mean, just as Father said earlier, just as we have all the data. We watched the Protestant mainline absolutely collapse, and in America, it collapsed precisely because it lost all of its traditional distinctiveness. And once the church just looks like the world, what motivation does anybody have to make sacrifices for something that's just profane? And I think we see the inverse happening in Latin America. We see, as you say, a kind of liberalizing effect in the Catholic Church globally has made people think it's not serious. It's not official Christianity. It's not the faith delivered once for all by Jesus Christ. That's the feeling that people get. And so when something like Pentecostalism comes and has fervor and believes that, you know, a family's a man and a woman having children, believes like basic real things, that is not rigid to people, but that looks like reality. And so people flock to that and flock away to, they walk away from the truth because the truth has been watered down and muddied and confused. And I think when the lay faithful are asking for better catechesis, when they're asking for evangelization, what they're really asking for is for church leaders to take our church teaching seriously and not try to continue to conform them to basically progressive ideology.
Yeah, but Father Peter, I mean, it's really simple. They want the truth. They want to understand the truth and why it's endured all this time and why it will be true tomorrow. But they don't know what that is. It hasn't been clearly defined, or rather now the lines of it have been twisted and bent, so they don't really know what they're supposed to believe as Catholics. Isn't that part of the problem?
All of this brings to mind an episode that where very early in my years as a priest, I was a high school administrator, and it was at the time of John Paul's first visit to the States. And after his visit in a religion class, we were talking about it, and the one kid, freshman in high school, said, "I think he's great. I think he's really great." I said, "Well, in Boston," he said, "no fornication, no drugs, no, no, no." And I said, "Do you live that way? Do you?" And he said, "Well, whether I do or not, that's not important, Father. But the Pope has given me a fence to bump up against, and at least I know how far I could go or shouldn't go." Which, again, that goes back to authoritative teaching. And, presumably a 13, 14-year-old high school freshman would want total laissez-faire approach to life, but he didn't. He wanted a standard, and that John Paul held that standard very high for 27 plus years.
Returning to the German Synod for a moment, I almost hate to do it. This past weekend, the German Synod voted 159 to 26 to adopt a draft statement calling on the Pope to allow Catholic bishops around the world to ordain married men. Now, we heard this during the Amazon Synod once before. I'll bet it's going to be resurrected once more. It also calls to give already ordained priests permission to marry without having to leave the priesthood. That was voted on 163 to 42 among the Germans to ordain women as deacons. Now, Father, the Church historically has had married priests, and in some instances still does allow for married clergy. What do you make of this demand by the German Synod to increase priestly vocations if priests are allowed to marry? Does that help?
Well, it obviously doesn't, because let's take a look at the Eastern Orthodox, who have had a married clergy for a millennium. And the Greek Orthodox, for example, their average age of a priest is 10 years higher than ours. So obviously, having a married clergy is not attracting people to the priesthood in the Orthodox Church. And that's, at least they're closest to us. With the other denominations, there's no evidence whatsoever that marriage or even female ordination increases the pool of candidates.
Yeah. And Chad, what do you make of that focus on female deaconesses? I mean, are there so many women out there that want to be deaconesses that it would cure the priest shortage? I mean, is that the remedy? And I thought John Paul II definitively closed the door to this conversation of female ordination.
Well, as did Francis, really. I mean, I think it is definitively closed, and this is a frustrating point. But I think the political aim here is to get the laundry list such that you have all your progressive ducks lined up, and at least you could get one of them through. You could get one catechetical change through if you ask for 4 ridiculous ones. And so I think we have to look at the broader picture here. That the aim, it reminds me a little bit of Gallicanism, where the Gallican heresy is that national customs should trump church teaching. And here, instead of national customs trumping church teaching, you have basically a global ideology that's trumping church teaching. And they're going to try to get as many of those things through as possible. So whether they get female deaconesses in through, I think they probably are fine to lose that, so long as they get a change in the catechism on homosexual acts being all right.
Father, the support for female deaconesses and the ordination of married men has also been echoed by the Relator General of the upcoming Synod, Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich, who we mentioned earlier. Now, this seems to be, as Chad indicates, almost a wholesale global reappraisal of Catholic teaching, or at least that's how these leaders see it.
But it's all coming from a desiccated, skeletal Christianity. There's nothing there that's vibrant. There's nothing there that's attractive. And with the whole thing with deaconesses, we know the whole story, the history of it. Books have been written about it. Yes, there were females who were called deaconesses, but they weren't ordained, and their ministry, in quotes, was to assist with female baptism. So why are we wasting time and energy on all of this? But again, a lot of this has to do with too much money and too little time spent on the real things.
Yeah. Yeah, as lives fall apart and people are, drifting to eternity. I agree. Chad, are you worried about this Synod on Synodality transforming into something like a lobbying session by, noisy partisans with little or no room to Orthodox, faithful, believing Catholics?
I mean, yes, I'm worried about it because historically, I don't know what a synod on synodality is. And I've studied the church's history on synods. It's a bit like having a lecture on lectures or a class on classes or a seminar on seminars. Synods and councils are about resolving some problem in the church.
Right.
And some error that needs to be corrected. And all the errors that I see in the church right now are manifested in the German synodal way. And so my question is what error is going to be corrected by the Synod on Synodality? We better hope and pray it's the errors promoted by the Germans. That's our best hope. Will the Synod on Synodality copy Germany or correct it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, these things are set. There's a form to them, and I am concerned that even those voices, critical voices that were on the fringes of the last few synods, those pockets of orthodoxy. The question is, will they have a place at all in this upcoming synod? Well, I get
the deck is stacked. I mean, the deck is stacked in Germany itself. When you have a third of the committee formed by lay people who are all progressive ideologues, the German synodal way itself is a stacked deck. They are paying for the Synod on Synodality, and you're not going to hear the issues that your viewers raise on the floor of the Synod on Synodality, I fear.
Father, isn't this the big concern? Go ahead.
25 years ago, I was in Germany around Christmas time. I was visiting a parish in Augsburg and was there for the Feast of the Epiphany, which is a holy day, it was at least a holy day of obligation in the country. And at the principal Mass on Epiphany, there were 14 people in the church. I looked at the parish bulletin. There were 60 paid ecclesial workers. And I said to the parochial vicar, where are those people? He said, they never go to Mass at all. And again, it's too much money spent on very bad stuff with bad characters in the mix. And this is what you see in the German Synod. It's those same professionals, in quotes, working their way through the entire morass of bureaucracy.
Yeah, well, as Chad was alluding to, I mean, the question is, who's shaping the agenda and who is making the final, who's part of this voting body that will make these suggestions to the Pope? But when you hear calls for people who don't believe in anything, non-Catholics, why are they being invited in? It would be like inviting, strangers into your home to tell you how you're going to live in the next, for the next 100 years. This is crazy. You're not a member of the household. You're not a part of the family. Therefore, you don't get to have a say. Go have your own synodal way in your own house, but you can't do it here. I want to move on to another story. On Tuesday, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI personally requested forgiveness from abuse victims. This was in a letter responding to a report that faulted his handling of abuse cases during his tenure in Munich as Archbishop from 1977 to 82. Georg Ganswein, Benedict's secretary, read this letter, and I'll translate here. He says, in all my meetings, especially during my many apostolic journeys with victims of sexual abuse by priests, I have seen at first hand the effects of a most grievous fault. And I have come to understand that we ourselves are drawn into this grievous fault whenever we neglect it or fail to confront it with the necessary decisiveness and responsibility, as too often happened and continues to happen. As in those meetings, once again, I can only express to all the victims of sexual abuse my profound shame, my deep sorrow, and my heartfelt request for forgiveness. I have had great responsibilities in the Catholic Church. All the greater is my pain for the abuses and the errors that occurred. in those different places during the time of my mandate. Father Stravinskas, first, what do you make of this report coming out now, faulting Benedict for the handling of abuse cases during his tenure in Munich?
Well, I think if we back up and ask, how did that originate, that study? It was paid for by the Archdiocese of Munich. And we all know that whoever commissions a study controls the process. I mean, if you pay Gallup to do certain questions for you, you already have a clue as to how you want that survey to come out. And so that's number one. Number two, when you look at the results, it's interesting. They accuse Benedict of 4 cases and then Vetter in between for many, many more, and then Marx for 2 or 3. Marx is never mentioned anymore about it. And all of the emphasis is on Benedict. This is a clear attempt to destroy anything of a Benedict legacy. And I think Archbishop Genstein alluded to that in one of his comments to an Italian TV network. This should not be taken very, very seriously at all, unfortunately. But it's a hatchet job.
Chad, your reaction to Benedict's apology, which we should say he admits no guilt in that apology.
Yeah, calls it a confession, but there's no confession. I mean, what I think is so, what makes me mad is that the pretext for all of this is abuse cases, like real abuse cases, like boys who were abused, that is now being used to raise cancel culture to the highest level against an innocent Pope Emeritus. And it makes me so angry, actually, that our attention is being taken away from abuse victims. And I think this is what Pope Benedict stressed in his own confession, is just that his heart is with them. This huge study that, as Father said, was paid for by the Archdiocese of Munich, is really just slander and defamation. As Ed Penton said, it's an attempt to sort of damn his memory. And I just think it's so shameful. It's worldliness at the highest levels of the church. And I think it should sicken all of us. Cancel culture at the highest levels of the church.
Yeah, Chad, it's one thing if someone is deceased, but when they're living in the garden and you destroy the motu proprio that was the defining mark of his liturgical reform, and then you allow these kinds of, slanders to roam about the land without real correction, you do wonder what's at play here. Father, I'll give you the last word here.
Well, I think it's probably a good sign in the sense that they know this man has something to offer. And intelligent people now and 20 years from now are not going to look back at the Munich report. They're going to look at the omnia opera of Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI. The same thing that has been tried with destroying the legacy of John Paul, all of the attacks on the Polish emeriti bishops. Again, it's a drumbeat designed to destroy the 2 previous pontificates, and I don't think it's. And
I should say for the record before we end, Pope Francis did come to Pope Benedict's defense when this Munich report was first released. So I want to state that clearly for the record. But it's other parties have their own, I think, agendas in this story. Father Peter Stravinskas, Professor Pecknold, thank you both for being here. We will check in with you in the days ahead.
Thanks.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.